Tonight on Free Minds TV, we're going to be getting into Ron Paul's press conference and some of the interesting events that took place there. We're also going to be getting into some Vermont officials who aren't too happy with people writing in joke candidates on their ballots because there are some hidden costs associated with that. We're also going to be getting into some unexpected costs to the Iraq War and a whole lot more, all tonight on Free Minds TV.
And welcome to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you, as always, is Toby.
And Nick.
All right, we've got a ton going on today. Later on in the show, we're going to get into some articles that are, well, a little bit more humorous than we usually talk about here on the show. That being with something that's a little bit more humorous that's going on in Iraq, a hidden cost that's going on there. It's not as tragic as most of the news we bring you that's coming from Iraq, but, you know, it's tragic in its own sense. We'll be getting to that and a whole lot more. But first, Nick, you've been telling me about this press conference. I didn't get a chance to watch it yet, but I hear some interesting stuff happened with it with Ron Paul and Bob Barr, some disagreements. Bob Barr actually didn't even show up to it, or what's going on here? Let's start from the beginning.
Well, I'll start from scratch by what the press conference was Ron Paul was giving this conference, and it was known ahead of time that Bob Barr from the Libertarian Party was supposed to be there. Chuck Baldwin, the Constitution Party, Cynthia McKinney from the Green Party, and Ralph Nader, who's running as an independent this year, they were all supposed to show up. Well, what the press conference ended up being about was Ron Paul encouraging people to vote for third-party candidates. Vote for, if you're going to vote for anybody but McCain or Obama. And if you're not going to vote, make a point of that. Make it known that you're not voting, not because you're lazy, but because there's nobody you feel deserves your vote. Well, Bob Barr withdrew about half an hour before the press conference was supposed to start and decided to throw his own press conference down the hall. And it gets a little bit confusing what actually was going on.
Now let's stop right there. I mean, we'll move on from there, but I just wanted to address this point, that the point of the press conference, what Ron Paul is saying here is, let's not vote for the Republicans and Democrats. If we're going to be voting, let's vote for third-party candidates to say, look, we're sick of this 1.5, 2-party system we have here, red team versus blue team. Let's actually move towards some real change, because when we have Democrats and Republicans, well, we're getting the exact same thing no matter what. We're getting bigger and bigger in government. We're getting the same no matter who we're voting for. So I'm right on with that. I mean, if you're going to be voting, let's not vote for more of the same of what we have, because then we're giving our tacit approval to what's going on in Washington and, of course, with the state governments and local governments too. But really, when I think more than anywhere else, when you're casting a vote on the national level for the federal government, if you're voting for a Democrat or a Republican, for the most part, 95% of the time, it makes little difference which one you're going to vote for, because we're going to see higher taxes no matter what, more spending no matter what, and we'll probably be at war somewhere in the world at some point in time, no matter who you vote for. So I like what the theme of this is, just saying we're sick of the Republicans and the Democrats giving us the same old bullcrap year after year and no real change. So we can move on from there, but I like the theme of the press conference right from the beginning, Nick.
Right. It's a great idea. Unfortunately, Bob Barr doesn't consider himself a third-party candidate or a minor party candidate, which, excuse me, but the Libertarian Party, not exactly a major party in the United States. Maybe if they're lucky, they pull in 2% on a good year instead of 1%. That's a minor party.
Yeah,
so
maybe maybe they are a little bit bigger than some of the other parties. Maybe they're bigger than, say, the Green Party or something. They are the third largest party. That's still very, very small. I mean, we have a mountain for the Republicans, a mountain for the Democrats, and then a little hill for the Libertarians. They are the third largest party, but it's very minor compared to others. It's, for the most part, it's been an educational campaign. Since the Bob Barr came into it, I'm fed up with the Libertarians. But for the most part, they're not a major party. I mean, let's be realistic here. The Libertarians are very small. They're good for educational outreach. Not so much anymore, but they're nothing major that's going on.
Right,
here.
but the interesting thing about this was that, at least in theory, the Libertarian Party is the one whose message is closest to what Ron Paul was talking about, which was limited government, a non-interventionist foreign policy. You know, as far as applying a consistent, either a constitutional idea or a limited government idea, you would think that the Libertarian Party is probably the closest to Paul. Well, the party, since Bob Barr decided to withdraw, the parties that showed up were the Constitution Party, which, you know, they're sort of a smaller government party. Some of the social issues they are sort of conservative on, but for the most part, they believe in following the Constitution. Yeah. So close
Not so
to
good
Paul.
on the drug war, but they're better than the same of Republicans and Democrats on some issues, at least.
Right, and then you have Nader and McKinney, who are pretty far from Paul on the ideology. But I think that the idea behind this press conference was to have two parties that are not necessarily right-wing, but two parties that might appeal to independents and Republicans, and two parties that, or candidates, Nader and McKinney, who probably appeal to people who might be independent, but they probably consider themselves liberals. They believe in bigger government in some regards, but they'd like to see a much different model. So still trying to effect change that way. Well, what happened after Barr withdrew and through his own press conference? He said that he would be willing to make Ron Paul his running mate. And Wayne Allen Root, who was Bob Barr's running mate, said he would be willing to step down if Ron Paul would accept. There were also some, but on the other hand, there were also some clashes between the Barr campaign and Ron Paul's group, the Campaign for Liberty. And according to the Independent Political Report, Bob Barr's press secretary told the press secretary for Ron Paul's people to F off at one point after they got frustrated. And the Barr campaign today proceeded to release basically just an article that condemned Ron Paul for showing a lack of leadership. What I really think they meant by that was Ron Paul didn't endorse Bob Barr. And they were hoping for a specific endorsement of Bob Barr.
Ron Paul's not perfect by any means. Ron Paul has his flaws, just like anyone does. There's never going to be a leader that's perfect, because a real leader wouldn't be leading people, and real elected officials just following the Constitution. So I don't know if I want to call elected officials leaders so much. I mean, Ron Paul, I agree with him probably on 90% of the issues, but he's not perfect. So then you take a step back and look at Bob Barr, and I agree on him like 50% of the issues. So when we're looking at who should be whose running mate here, I don't like Bob Barr. This just makes me like Bob Barr even less. Am I just a hater, Nick, on Bob Barr? Because we've been getting emails from people who are not pleased with me and my stance on Bob Barr. You're a little bit more friendly towards him.
No, I was. I gave him sort of a benefit of the doubt to see how things shook out, what he would be saying on the campaign trail. And the speeches he's been giving about things like Fannie and Freddie getting bailed out by the government, he is not communicating ideas of small government and personal liberty anywhere near as effectively as Ron Paul. And Barr isn't clearly even expressing policies that are necessarily libertarian. Barr sounds like a conservative when he's speaking, just, you know, a regular middle-of-the-road Republican, to be quite honest with you, just for the rhetoric he uses. So,
and he's running as a libertarian. Ron Paul was running as a Republican. Sounds more like a libertarian.
So things kind of got switched around. We should kind of just
switch positions here. So, the Bob Barr and Ron Paul people are no longer in agreements, I guess?
Well, there's some personality clashes there. I don't think Ron Paul has said anything bad about Bob Barr. After all, he invited Bob Barr to this press conference to sort of lend him at least a partial endorsement, and Bob Barr turned it down. I'm turned off by what's happened with the Libertarian Party. I know that one of the founding members just yesterday, just before this press conference, the founding member of the Libertarian Party, David Nolan, released a statement that he had written to the Bob Barr campaign, and he noted that Bob Barr doesn't mention conspicuously anywhere on his website, in his interviews, in his campaign literature, on his bumper stickers, that he is a libertarian. So I really think that that party has been co-opted. I used to identify with it personally, and I really, at this point, at least as far as the National Party goes, I don't identify with it. So,
all right. Well, I know that probably many of you guys don't know who we're talking about. Ron Paul, you're probably familiar with, but let's face it, a lot of the viewers out there are more focused on Obama and McCain and don't know who Bob Barr is. Well, I'm sorry for you guys who had to listen to this. It's having to do with third-party candidates, which we like to talk about here a lot, and apparently Bob Barr just doesn't seem to agree with. So let's move on for people to get into some more news that people will everyone can identify with, and that has to do with some of the big spending that's going on in Washington, some of the stuff that they can actually maybe make some kind of a change with Downsize DC. What's this week's Downsizer Dispatch, Nick?
Well, this week's Downsizer Dispatch actually deals with the election and why maybe, if you're in the same boat that we are here on Free Minds TV, you're not really too excited about any of your choices at this point, even the third parties. Downsize DC is a way to affect change. And it's easy during the political season to get caught up in this game that the media plays, the horse race, basically, where they're saying, is McCain going to have a slightly better policy than Obama? Who's winning with certain demographics? Who's got the women's vote? Who has the African-American vote? Who has the blue-collar vote? And it's all pretty pointless, but it leads to a lot of animosity. And after the last segment we just did, I wanted to agree with Downsize DC here and say that if you get too involved in the election and the partisan games that go on, you'll start to look at people as your enemy. You'll start to look at Republicans as your enemy, or Democrats, or a certain third party as your enemy, or even the person that doesn't vote. You're going to attack them. But that's not really the issue here. The issue is ideas. And in my opinion, all the candidates we have right now, they're expressing pretty bad ideas. And to quote the Downsizer Dispatch here, a dumb idea can stall progress and keep life-saving technology at bay. We see that quite a bit with government intervention. A bad idea can lead to incidental deaths, something probably like the drug war. And a horrible idea can result in genocide, a point we haven't gotten to yet, but we could. And really, Downsize DC exists to win a war of ideas. It does seek to influence the political process, but it's trying to put pressure on elected officials, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, Independents, you name it. What they're trying to do is change the way that these people vote and really change the values that they're voting for. They want them to vote for smaller government, personal liberty, really just to let the government leave you alone. That's really the core of the idea of having small government, having personal liberty, is that you get to make your own decisions. They might not always be good ones, and you might have to deal with the consequences, but you're free to have power over your own life. And Downsize DC has been doing that with things like the Read the Bills Act, the Write the Laws Act. I mean, these are pretty common sense measures that are just designed to slow down the growth of the state. You're going to try to put some roadblocks in place and hopefully turn the tide so we can start repealing many of these laws that they're passing so many that these elected officials don't have time to read them. How can we be expected to follow that many laws? Certainly, we have too many on the books, and if you go to downsizedc.org, sign up for the Downsizer Dispatch, sign up for their email updates, and they'll keep you updated on certain acts of legislation, things like warrantless wiretapping, things like ethanol subsidies, which make no sense either environmentally or economically. Basically, they're going to update you when the government's trying to expand its sphere and influence, whether it's on civil liberties or economic liberties, and they're going to be trying to help promote their campaigns, legislation they've crafted, to try to bring some accountability and responsibility back to Washington.
Sounds good. You can learn more about that at downsizedc.org. All right, when we come back, what if you're like me and no one on the ballot looks good to vote for? What do election officials what do election officials think about that? When we come back, we're going to be talking about a story from Vermont where election officials are very bad because they're getting too many write-ins. We'll tell you why they're so upset when we come back. Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV.
Free Minds TV is brought to you in part by freekeen.com, bringing liberty activists together with blogs, a forum, and more. All at freekeen.com. That's freekeen.com.
Well, thank you, Spencer.
This is Mark Edge from Free Talk Live, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. As always, with you here is Toby.
And Nick.
All right, Nick. Yesterday was primary day in I think 6 different states across the country. People coming out and voting for who they would like to see on the ballot in the next election. Well, a lot of people don't want to see any of the people who are on the ballot because, well, a lot of the seats aren't even contested, and then from there, there's not much choice at all. I mean, it's a primary, so you have choices between a Republican ballot or a Democratic ballot. At least I did, because I'm here in New Hampshire, where I can be an independent and choose on voting day. Some people are locked in ahead of time, so they have to already choose a Republican or Democratic ballot. But when I went into the voting booth, there was no one, not one person that I really wanted to vote for. I mean, it doesn't matter if I had a Republican ballot or a Democratic ballot. There was crap on both of them. None of them I wanted to be my elected officials. I didn't want to vote for any of them come the primary. So I voted in none of the above. I did a write-in for everyone, none of the above. And then today, when I was looking some of the articles that were coming out of yesterday's primary, one caught my eye, and it said that election officials, at least in Vermont, are very upset about all these write-ins because it's costing them extra time and extra money, at least in the cases where people who count the ballots are paid. They say that votes for Mickey Mouse, they get tons of votes for Mickey Mouse. Those are just thrown out, so those don't cost too much money. But votes for someone, say Bart Simpson, for example, there's actually maybe someone named Bart Simpson, so they have to count all those votes and then tally them up, and they don't like doing that. It's way too much work for them. They also say, this is where I'm going to get your opinion, Nick, is it's costing actual taxpayer money. So if I don't want to vote for someone, I don't want any of the above. Should I go out and vote for a fake name, none of the above, something like that, which may cost more tax dollar money? Or should I stay home and be apathetic like over 50%, or in this case, I think it was more like 90% of registered voters did, and not vote at all?
Well, I don't know that writing in a joke name, there's really much point. I wouldn't want to take my time to go down to the polling station and show them my ID.
But isn't it like saying I don't like any of these people? I came out to vote and I didn't like any of them.
Right. Well, yeah, I guess you could look at it that way. I would probably write none of the above.
Well, that's what I did.
Sending a message there.
I used to write in names like Mickey Mouse and stuff, but then I wanted to be like, no, I don't like any of these. I wanted the message to be a little bit more clear. And let's face it, they probably just throw that away and it's no message to anyone. But it makes me feel a little bit better.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I went out. There wasn't really a contested race that I intended to vote for. There was one person running as a Republican, as a representative here in Keene. Of course, when I looked at the ballot, there were 7 people running in 7 slots, which I hadn't had a chance to look at a sample ballot. I just assumed that they might have some people running. So there wasn't too much point in me going out to vote there. But I did. I circled the box for that one person. And there was also someone running for Senate who was a long shot, and I voted for them instead of Sununu, just as kind of a protest vote. And I just left my ballot blank on the other ones. Generally what I do is I just don't. If I don't feel like voting for a race, I just leave it blank, because I feel that that sends a message too. I mean, if I voted for the state rep races and none of the other races on the ballot, I think it seems to indicate that I'm not too interested.
What if they actually did tally up all the write-ins that didn't make it and then put out that little percentage? So McCain, let's say in the election, McCain gets 40%, Obama another 40%, and then 20% none of the above written in, or something like that. Wouldn't that send a clearer message than people staying home? Because let's face it, most people don't vote. I mean, not voting, most people already don't vote. So when we don't vote, well, that's sending the message that most people are already doing, but the elected officials will still always vote for themselves. The teachers will still always vote for themselves. So someone's always going to vote. So protesting by not voting, does that actually get us somewhere? I know everyone has different opinions on this. Mine is that not voting, well, most people already are not voting.
Well, if your reason for not voting isn't based on a philosophical idea, if you're just saying, I don't really feel like going out and voting, which a lot of people do. Some people have a philosophical reason they don't want to vote, or some kind of a principle that keeps them from voting. Many people just don't go out and vote, or they don't, they think, well, it's just a state primary, there's not much at stake. But 10% of the electorate or so is still going to go out there. Most of them are going to be the partisan folks. And that's one of the reasons why you don't have a whole lot of choice, why the partisan candidates who toe the party line are always the ones who come up for election in November, because you have basically 10% of people who are actually affiliated with a party showing up to vote, which is a tiny percentage of the population. I mean, of the number of people who voted in the Republican primary or the Democratic primary in the state, you probably had maybe 3 or 4%
Yeah.
of the actual population voting in each.
10% of the elected, say you get 10% of the elected people who are registered to vote coming out, well, that's not even 10% of the population. That's, like you said, more like 4% of the actual population. Anyways, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. You, the viewer, we do care what you think. fmtv@freemindstv.com is the email, fmtv@freemindstv.com, or you can leave us a message on our talkback line, 206-350-0123, 206-350-0123. All right, real quick, let's get into this story. It's a quick one. It's coming out of Iraq, and it's one more of those hidden costs that, well, you probably don't know about. It's one that really surprised me, and that is that some of the what we have as culturally here in America is actually starting to be adopted over in Iraq. No, it's not what we have here exactly. It's not the most positive things. It has to do with the Battle of the Bulge and fat people. There are more fat Iraqis now than ever before. Now, why is this? Well, they've been at war for years, folks. And when you're at war, you constantly have tanks going by or cars blowing up or suicide bombers. One thing leads to another. You don't really want to go out and exercise as much. So you have a lot of Iraqis staying inside and watching TV, acting like Americans. So is this what we wanted, Nick? Was this our goal? We're pushing to 26 to 38%. 26% of men, 38% of women, 25 to 65 are now obese in Iraq. That compared here in America, we're at 33% of men and 35% of women. So actually more women are obese in Iraq than here in America. Is this what we meant when we said we wanted to spread our values across the world? Fatness?
Well, I was never a fan of the idea of spreading our values across the world at the point of a gun. But yeah, I wouldn't have expected this, to be quite honest with you, but it makes sense. And as kind of trivial and funny as the subject matter directly in the article is, it's kind of funny to think that we made people fat. Now that was a direct result of the war. But there are serious other problems that go along with being inside. I mean, it's not very healthy to be inside all the time. I'm sure from an emotional and psychological standpoint, if you're hiding in your house and not going out, you're probably, pretty scared. That's not good for you. That much stress and being overweight is really not good for people's health or for their psyche to live in a war zone. It's just, I think Americans don't think about it very much because we haven't had a war on our soil for over 100 years.
I didn't go out and exercise today because I'm lazy, not because I might get blown up. So I mean, it is sad. It's I guess more. I take it as humorous because it's better than some of the other stories we've been reading on from Iraq, but it is tragic nevertheless. But we do have to move on. We've got to move on. We've got more show coming at you when we come back. We're going to be talking about Fannie and Freddie. The government bailouts continue. We'll be right back. This is Free Minds TV.
Free Minds TV is brought to you in part by Life Productions for your basic and semi-pro video production needs. From full wedding and event coverage to DVD authoring and distributions, lifeproductions.com. That's LYFproductions.com. Stick in between segments of our show.
Okay, I can do that. Hi there, I'm Russell Canning, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. As always, this is Toby.
And Nick.
All right, Nick, we're running out of time. We're short on it, but there has been more developments on Freddie and Fannie.
Yep.
Big old mortgage brokers, the lenders that have failed at lending properly and now need the government to help them. Please, please, please help them. And I guess the tax dollars are up to this. What's the latest news, Nick?
Well, the government has made it official. They're taking over Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They're nationalizing them, socializing them, whatever term you want to use. And it has led many people, and not just political extremists, to throw out the charge that this really makes the United States one of the more socialist countries in terms of its economic involvement. This is the biggest government nationalization in money terms since communist China and the USSR.
How much money are we talking about here, Nick?
Well, we're talking about $6 trillion in public assets.
$6 trillion? Do we have $6 trillion on hand? How do you wait?
Well, the government prints its own money, Toby.
Oh,
or they
right,
ask
right,
their
right,
friends
right,
at the
right,
Federal Reserve to print the money
No,
for
but
them.
$6 trillion, that's like the GDP for what, like 3 years here in the U.S.?
Yeah.
That's a sizable chunk of change.
Yeah, and it was a really great investment, too, because there's actually $200 billion in equity versus $6,000 in liabilities.
Wow.
$6,000 billion in liabilities. And a lot of people are blaming this on the free market. The Bush administration claimed that it was a free market administration, so have previous administrations. And the charge is that, well, this occurred because of a lack of regulation. Well, that's not exactly true. What occurred was the government always had this implied guarantee that they would back up Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. If you're a company that has an implied guarantee to a lifeline from the federal government, from the U.S. Treasury, you're going to do pretty well in the marketplace. You have an unfair advantage in that respect.
Yeah, you're also going to take on some riskier clients. If you don't have to worry about your clients defaulting and not paying you back when you lend them something, don't worry, the government will pay you back if your clients don't. Well, you know what, I'm going to lend money to just about anybody.
And that's how these companies got, in my opinion, these companies got too big to fail because originally they were government entities that had a virtual monopoly on the market when they were first semi-privatized. And the government's never really fully severed that link. So you can't say that they were ever truly privatized because the government always viewed them as some kind of national asset that they would bail out. So it wasn't the free market that made these companies too big to fail. It was government intervention.
Yes, and it's not just that intervention. I know that we were talking about the same thing on the latest episode of Free Minds Radio, talking about how a lot of it has to do with inflation. And we don't have money that's backed by anything. We have this fiat currency, which allows for some pretty harsh banking strategies where they're loaning out way more money than they actually have, fractional reserve banking, the fiat currency allowing for much more of that than they would if we had an actual gold-backed system. They're loaning out many, many times more money than they actually have back in the vault, and not to mention that the money is not backed by anything anyways.
Yeah, as you can see, here they had a debt ratio of 30-1. And
so even when only 1% of the people default on their houses, well, now they're in the toilet because they have such a huge ratio of fractional reserve banking.
Pretty much, and this worries me not just about the housing market. If this bailout were happening in a vacuum, yeah, it would be bad public policy. It would be a turn back towards socialism. But I'm worried that this is going to set a precedent for other bailouts and a further socialization of the American economy. The auto industry is in trouble right now. There's some speculation that they could be asking for a bailout. The airlines get bailouts. I mean, we really don't live in a free market country. Many of our major industries are directly funded by the taxpayer, except it's kind of a socialism for the rich, because when these industries make money, that goes to private investors. Those profits go to private investors. When they're losing money and they need a bailout, they turn to the taxpayer, which is you and me, as well as those investors.
And I'm not making any money off
they socialize the
them.
costs.
Anyways, a lot of you probably think we're crazy. If so, we'd love to hear from you. fmtv@freemindstv.com is our email, or 206-350-0123 is the talkback line. Join us online, freemindstv.com, archives, ways to help the show, donate, the members section, a whole lot more, all at freemindstv.com. Well, we're out of time for now. Join us this Sunday, 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, Free Minds Radio, live streaming on the internet. For now, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a great night. So I'm going to make some rhubarb pie.